Raffi.
Hello, Nick.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you?
Raffi has an amazing career, all kinds of great organizations, but let's dig right into it because you have a lot to say. Your hypothesis is that we are making a huge mistake, all of us, by relying on these gigantic companies and their foundation models, correct?
That's one way to say it. I mean,
Okay.
here's what I worry about these days, but I think there's ways out of it. I worry that these systems that we're all starting to use, getting addicted to, using instead of Google search, et cetera, are not actually on our side. I think they're on the side of someone else. So like, well, for example, like now, when you go to ChatGPT and ask it for an answer to a question, it'll search the web for you, it'll summarize, it'll do whatever you want. Whose incentives were encoded in that response? Like, is that incentive, is the encoded response the thing that's meant for me, or is it meant to someone else? So if I ask it to, I want to go book a trip to Paris, and it sends me to an Expedia link, for example, did it send me to an Expedia link because there's a deal behind the scenes, or is Expedia actually the right thing to send it to? These systems are opaque, and there's no way for me to know.
You feel like Google search was unpolluted in that sense?
Well, I think we all underestimated how much having 10 blue links on the screen did for us. Like in some ways, like those 10 blue links allowed us to have a window into how Google was thinking. Like we all know what PageRank kind of is. We might not know exactly how it works, but we saw an instantiation of PageRank on that web page. We saw which ones were sponsored. We have a good sense of like who's linking to what. But all that's kind of disappeared. We've traded this convenience for agency. I feel like we've left on the table all the work my brain was doing to try to sort through this. It's now just handed it off to someone else, and I don't quite know what that is.
Is your concern that we're handing it off, we're cognitive offloading? Is your concern that we're handing it off to someone with corrupt incentives?
Yes. I think like both of those could potentially be true.
Okay, so fine, fair, good enough. What is your agenda for fixing that?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Because these models are pretty great. I just asked for like a rehab routine for my son for his back spasms. I don't know what the corrupt incentives were, but I told him to stretch his hamstrings. Sounds great.
Look, I use it every single day. I'm guilty of this too. Like I have ChatGPT, Claude, Cursor, I have all these things running on my laptop. So like I get it too. But I think the way that we need to think about this is just like, are we owners or are we renters in the way that intelligence is working? So right now, I would argue that as we go and use these systems that are powered by someone else, we're renting our intelligence. We're no longer owning it. And I want to work towards a world that we can get to ownership over that rentership. And I think—
But wait, why is that bad? Like renting, like I go to a new city, I rent a car. I'm here in Munich, I'm renting a hotel room. Like sometimes renting is great, sometimes owning is great.
Renting is super convenient, don't get me wrong. I think the problem is when the landlord decides to change the rules on you. That's the thing that I worry about. So like I rent an apartment in New York City, everything's fine and great. I have my nice little apartment in Soho, then my landlord decides to repaint it. Or my landlord decides that like he wants to up the rent. Your landlord wants to change all these things.
That's your problem for renting in Soho, but go on.
But I think that like the goal should be that there is an option for me to own what my intelligence looks like. Not everyone might want to deploy their own models. That I take for granted. But I think that we have to have the ability.
If everybody deployed their own models.
I mean, it'd be chaos in the sense that like everyone has like a slightly different version of the world. We all have a slightly different version of the world right now.
Okay, so your notion is that we shouldn't rely on these big models, both because they're corrupt and because we're essentially renting. They can change the rules on us. They can change the voice of the model. They can change the answers. We have no idea what's going on. So the solution is to have not just open source models, but actually open source up the whole stack of usage?
I think we need to have credible alternatives. I think credible alternatives puts pressure on all these big companies in order to change the way that they're behaving and the way they treat our agency.
Wait, so credible alternatives that are publicly owned, that are open source, that
I'm going to go with open source. Okay. I'm going to go with like, we need to understand how these things work.
And what do you mean by open source?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to be very pragmatic about this. There's a black and white version of it, which is like, I want openness all the way to training data, evaluation, the way it's rigged into the system, the way that training actually goes and works. I actually think that like having the middle ground is actually a good first step for now. Like I think the open weights world is an okay step. There are some caveats to that. Like for example, if you were to use Llama from Meta, they already say that if you have a certain number of users, they're going to change the rules on you. You might not know exactly what they're going to do, but they already say that there's a limit there. But it allows you to have experimentation, it allows you to have freedom, it allows me to work on an N of 1. It allows it to be my model for a second.
Wait, hold on a second. If you're so keen on Llama and open source, and you're fine with the compromises Facebook's made in Llama, why are you running Anthropic on your machine?
Because I mean, like I think I'm also being. I think this is an example of. This is it more like the diagnosis of the problem than the actual problem itself. Like, look, I'm not asking anyone to be a martyr and not use the best tools.
Right.
So, like, I'm happy to still use the best tools, but we need a credible version to exist as an alternative.
So we need open source tools that are equally good to the frontier models.
Equally good. I think you can make a comparison to the way Signal works today. So Signal pushes pressure on the rest of the companies to up their privacy game. Like, I have a credible alternative I can use. I may not use Signal. My mom might not use Signal. She might want to use iMessage, whatever. But there's a credible alternative in the market.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just that the presence of Signal is a good product and you can use it and it actually protects your privacy end to end, but it also pushes WhatsApp, Telegram, iMessage in different ways.
And I think that we can do the exact same thing on the open source model world and the open source stack in general.
Okay, so let's talk about the open source stack, because there are a lot of different components. So what about developer tools? Do you think all of those should be open source? How close are we to that, and what does it mean?
So maybe let's step back for a second. I think there are 4 places that we can make collectively an attack in order to try to flip the AI system. So I think developer tools is one. I'll talk about that in a second. I think the data layer is another. I think the model layer is a third. And I think hardware is the hardest, but I think that's the fourth. Talking about the developer tools for a second, I think that developer tools right now just suck. Like, if you're a third-party developer right now and you want to go build a really good experience, you're clearly going to use the OpenAI API. It is so easy to do. In fact, I do it right now. Like, I'm guilty of this. I probably have Cursor running in my hotel room right now and it's writing against the OpenAI API. We need to make that way easier. There's actually a vibrant open source ecosystem out there that has a lot of choice, that has a lot of functionality, but just gluing it together, even for someone like me, is hard. We need to make that easier. We need to make that glue work.
Okay, but OpenAI is worth whatever it's worth, $700 billion. Anthropic is now worth $200 billion. So they can hire every developer in the world to build their APIs. You have an open source alternative and like a bunch of kids in their college dorm because they think it's cool. Like, how are they going to compete in building efficient APIs?
Well, I think that like everyone is already building the parts of the stack that's needed. There's as I said, there's a huge ecosystem and a lot of money out there right now. Like, people are building fully open end-to-end models right now. People are building fully open evaluation systems. What's just missing is that glue layer. And I actually think that's a product management question. That's not a personnel question. I think we just need to reframe it to the open source community. I think that like the vibrancy and the excitement of the open source community.
I mean, they did build Linux and Apache and
and Firefox, right? I think we just need to put a challenge out there, and then we can rally the forces.
Okay, so you need like by tools you mean like there needs to be an open source GitHub, right?
There needs to be an open source GitHub. There needs to be an open source API that you can call. There needs to be all these things in place.
Okay, so we need all of these open source developer tools. That's level one of level 4. Level 2 is data?
Level 2 is data. So one of the things Mozilla is up to is we're thinking a lot about what provenance embedded data sets look like. What does licensable data sets look like? In fact, we just launched an initiative, a company that we're calling the Mozilla Data Collective. And what they're doing is they're building a 2-sided marketplace for licensable data so that any radio station in the world, for example, could put their data set on the Mozilla Data Collective and have another person actually license that data legally with all the paperwork, transact money in order to get that data set to use for their training system. That's one part of the data question.
Music to my ears, I work in media. It would be great if people licensed it instead of stealing it.
Instead of stealing it.
But how does that make it, if all the big companies that have all the money in the world are stealing it, and then all these small companies with no money are paying for it. It's like the affluent people get their clothes for free and the homeless have to pay for it. Like, how does that work, Raffi?
Well, I mean, I think I'm willing to make the bet that I think like the New York Times lawsuit and other lawsuits are actually going to go in the right direction. And so like I think that these are long-term questions, not short-term questions. So like how much money in aggregate are you going to have to pay once someone decides to start suing you for using their data sets. But also licensable data is only one part of the data equation. There's also like all your user context. So for example, if you're a ChatGPT user versus a Claude user and you want to switch one day, you just told ChatGPT so much information about you that it's actually hard to make that switch.
Right.
So since someone like a Firefox and someone like a browser actually be that housing for the context of the user so that we can free it from all these different verticalized silos.
But then you've created another problem where if I'm an open source user, I can like move all my data into OpenAI, but I can't move all my data from OpenAI into the open source.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is that if you can go use a browser as your intermediary, so a browser is the user agent, right? Like a user agent was designed designed in such a way so that like it can protect you from ads, it can protect you from spyware, it can protect you from tracking. Maybe the next frontier that we have to go tackle is protect you from your context going to one of these companies.
Raffi, you're like net neutral for my business. You're like going to get us more money for licensing and less money for ads. But, let's, like...
but I think I'm good for your soul. Is where I'm coming to.
Well, that's why you've been invited for DLD. That's why everybody gets on the stage. Okay, so Raffi is good for your soul. Okay, so level 2 is data. So you're trying to build a two-sided data marketplace. Your idea is that ultimately the people who use it will be sued less, so it will help them economically.
And we can change the economics around the data that's being used to train these systems.
Which would be great because then the content creators around the world are not wiped out by these AI models. Okay, so then level 3 is the models.
The models themselves.
Right.
So right now, we're stuck in the world of transformers, diffusers, et cetera. And I think that that's because it just takes so much computational power to actually go train these things to go do what you want them to do. A lot of computational power, a lot of money. I think in the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to actually see a shift from these large language models to smaller, purpose-built models. And I think that these are already being shown in academia to outcompete the larger models.
Give me an example that's relevant to somebody in this room.
I mean, like just even take like if you would never, for example, although like ChatGPT was trained on all this information from the web, which includes driving data, you would never use ChatGPT to drive your car. Actually, I saw a paper of someone try to do it. It did not go well. But like you would never use ChatGPT to try to drive your car. So that's an extreme example of like there's a purpose-built model that's nothing to do with all these other really big models. It can run on device. It can be a lot cheaper to do. It can be a lot easier to deploy.
Okay, but let's say I'm an artist and I want to do upside down faces that are really beautiful, and I'm like I can do this, and I want to use AI to improve my art. How do I use that with a small?
So I think these are the frontier questions that are going to start happening this year. So there are people and academics right now who are figuring out how to do trained models just for artwork, trained models just for video. Yeah, they might be stealing some of the code from these larger models in order to bootstrap themselves, but these smaller, fine-tuned, purpose-driven models are going to be easier for people to create in the next 18 months.
So your view is that like a year from now or 6 months from now, let's say you're a venture capitalist and you're evaluating a bunch of startups, right? They're not going to be using Anthropic. They're not going to be using OpenAI Codex. They're not going to be using Gemini. They're going to be using smaller
They're going to
models.
be using networks of smaller models. So I think that we're going to see a pattern of
Are you short Anthropic and OpenAI and Google?
I think that this will be a very competitive race, but I think that we're going to get into this mixture of experts model where like you're going to be mixing together these smaller models to achieve the goals you want to do. And I think this is going to be for economic reasons. So I think Pinterest, for example, just at the end of last year, announced they saved about $10 million moving to open source models than using the rented models from the big platforms. I think we're going to see that play itself over and over.
But why? Okay. Fine, I'll accept your hypothesis that we're moving to smaller models. Why would the smaller models be open and not closed? Why wouldn't like OpenAI just make a bunch of small models and sell them to artists and to chefs?
There is nothing preventing them from doing that. But I think that like if we can get into this smaller world, I think once we get to a smaller world that we demonstrate it's possible, then this unlocks the hobbyists, the side developers, the small business owner to actually do their own model development in a way they can't do now. It's $100 million in order to do a training run on one of these larger models. But if I told you it was $10,000, that's much more interesting.
Okay, is it more ethical? I know you like open source models. Probably this room likes open source models. Is it more ethical to use Anthropic or DeepSeek?
That's such a great question, Nick. I mean, like we have to like look at the entire ecosystem. I think the question, like, if we look at the Chinese models right now, the best open source performing LLM is probably a Qwen model right now, the Alibaba models. And I think that like a lot of developers are using those models because they're easier to use and you can just boot them up on my GPU. In fact, I can boot it up on my GPU on my laptop and just start running against it. I mean, the question though really becomes just like where does the data come from that you can train it? Which is why I want transparency up and down the stack. Like I want to be able to make this
Also,
call.
what happens to your data? I mean, like, do you trust?
But I mean, the nice thing about running
Anthropic or Alibaba?
Well, so the nice thing about running a open source model is that like I'm running the model, not someone else is running the model. So like I run a Qwen model, I could run a Qwen model on my laptop today, ask it any question I want, the data goes nowhere. It's stuck on my laptop. So in that case, yeah, I trust this model more than I trust Anthropic model because my data isn't going anywhere. I don't have to be protected by a license agreement or a privacy agreement. It literally is just on my laptop.
Though also, if you go back to your first point, there could be malign incentives. Your Qwen model presumably is more likely to be pushing propaganda at you
Actually,
than the Anthropic model.
I will agree with this. One of my favorite papers from last year was around kidney donation. So they actually did an evaluation of all the big platforms and compared it both Western and Eastern on how they would do kidney donation. Kidney donation is a really complex matching problem. And it turns out all the Western models do something very different than the Eastern models do. So like, yes, there could be malign incentives, but again, I'm running it. I can understand those risks because it's sandboxed to me, and I know that my data isn't going anywhere. So sure, I can run the Quen model, but I could also run Llama. I could also run any other of these things. I think choice is what comes out of this.
Okay, so now let's go to category 4. So we've gone through developer tools and how to open source them, which seems pretty hard. We've gone to your two-sided marketplace for content licensing, which sounds amazing, but the economics are pretty tricky. And we've gone to open source models, small models, which maybe the one where it's most like, or it seems to me like you're having the most progress. 4 is open source hardware. What the heck does that mean?
Before I get there, I'm going to challenge your first one. We're actually making a lot of progress on developer tools right now. So Mozilla.ai has an entire thing that they call the Any Suite. And the goal of the Any Suite is like if you're writing code against Any Suite, it abstracts away which LLM you're choosing. So I can trivially switch from using OpenAI to a local model to a Claude, et cetera. And the goal here is to really give enterprises fundamental choice. Like right now, like if you're an enterprise, you don't write code against AWS because one day AWS is going to come to you and say, I want 100,000 euros next month. And you're going to be like, screw you, I'm moving to Azure. So I've written pieces of code that can make me move very fast. We're trying to do the exact same thing on the AI side. So I think we're making a lot of progress on the developer side. Open source hardware is the dream. Like, I don't think we're necessarily going to get there, but I think there's a lot of questions in the hardware stack, which basically all come around to, can we extend the abstraction layers to allow us to use other pieces of hardware that's not just NVIDIA? And I think that this is possible. We just haven't, no one's actually done it yet. So my example here is a good friend of mine from Carnegie Mellon figured out years ago how to use Amazon Spot instances to make Bitcoin mining profitable. And like that was just hyper-optimized code, handwritten, done all these things so we can eke it out inside an Amazon Spot instance. He remodeled his house by making a lot of money doing this. I think in this world of cursor, generative AI, et cetera, we actually might be able to unlock those exact same changes on AMD hardware or any other one of these hardware sources that are coming up.
But isn't the story of Bitcoin actually that it kind of went in reverse? Like there was a moment where hobbyists could figure out how to do hardware in a way that made an efficient competitive marketplace and kind of DIY people could compete. And then it just became, gigantic, corporations and people with millions of servers in China?
Yeah, I think that's true. And what I'm pointing to is like in the last 3 years, he was still able to go do something like this. So I think that like a lot of handwritten, really good systems engineers need to be activated and actually go work on this problem. I actually fundamentally believe a lot of these problems are just a matter of stating them clearly and stating the things that we want to get as an outcome. So like, this goes to like my point on product management on developer ecosystems. There's a lot of open source AI software out there in the world, but someone needs to state cleanly and be opinionated on what should the interface look like so all the developers can be unlocked.
This is a fascinating manifesto. It's fantastic for DLD. You got a whole bunch of people in the room. What should they do to further this? Probably a lot of people like agree with you ideologically, but have no idea half of what you're talking about, but are like, want to know, should they like delete their OpenAI account and open a Quen account? Like, what are you telling them?
I mean, I think that like the nice thing about the European context is that you all actually have political will. And so I think political will is one of the places it starts. Like political will then turns into a marketplace. So as we start defining better things around what data privacy looks like, when we start to define things of what context portability should look like, when we start defining all these different things, these just become requirements for software engineers to go do work. So I think that's the number one thing. It's like advocate with your legislatures, advocate with the EU Parliament that these things need to be codified so that we can have choice again in the ecosystem. And it's not just 5 companies in Silicon Valley that are making choices for us.
And do you think, I remember when I was a young college graduate, I remember feeling like I should use Linux instead of Windows. not because it was more efficient and easier, but because it was the right thing ideologically? Do you think that's like a feeling that like people should actually, you should be using open source models, you should be using open source developer tools?
I mean, I'll point out the Firefox example. The reason why Firefox was created was to break up what Microsoft was trying to do to the web. Microsoft was trying to make the web their platform. And what Firefox did was force it to be open, force it to have the right standards, force all the things that we now value in the web coming up. Granted, Firefox usage is a little down, but it was successful. The web was open because someone created something like a Firefox. We need the exact same thing on AI.
All right, perfect note to end on. Thank you so much, Raffi Krikorian.